Welcome to the Resilient Retail Game Plan, a podcast for anyone wanting to start, grow or scale a profitable creative product business with me, Catherine Erdley. The Resilient Retail Game Plan is a podcast dedicated to one thing, breaking down the concepts and tools that I've gathered from 20 years in the retail industry and showing you how you can use them in your business. This is the real nuts and bolts of running a successful product business, broken down in an easy, accessible way. This is not a podcast about learning how to make your business look good. It's the tools and techniques that will make you and your business feel good. Confidently plan, launch and manage your products, and feel in control of your sales numbers and cash flow to help you build a resilient retail business. So excited about today's episode. Can't wait to share it with you. Hi, I'm Catherine. I am the founder of the Resilient Retail Club as well as your host today. The Resilient Retail Club is my membership group for product businesses. You can find out more at resilientretailclub.com, and if you use the code 10podcast, that's 10 podcast, then you can get £10 off your first month. We would love to have you join us. So today's guest is Charlotte Morley. Charlotte Morley recently appeared on Dragon's Den, and funnily enough, the story caught my eye originally because there was lots of talk about how one of the dragons had a few tears in her eyes. Charlotte cried with relief when she got funding from not one but two dragons. But what I actually realised once I started watching the clip was that Charlotte's business, The Little Loop, is a fascinating look at a very important shift in the way that we buy, and that is the rental market. So the idea of the Little Loop, which Charlotte's going to describe in a lot more detail, better than I can do, is it's all about having a wardrobe that you can rent effectively for children's clothing. And I'm fascinated by the way that retail is shifting over time, and especially fascinated by this shift towards more sustainable methods of selling. I absolutely wanted to get Charlotte onto the podcast to talk not only about her Dragon's Den experience, which, let's face it, who hasn't thought about going on Dragon's Den or thought what it might be like at the very least, but also to find out more about the Little Loop and rental in general. Now, life has been so crazy for Charlotte since the Dragon's Den appearance that she was actually having to sit in the corridor where she works while we were having our interview. So you may hear a little bit of background noise, but I hope you'll enjoy it. We had an absolutely fascinating conversation, and I can't wait for you to let me know what you think about it. I hope you'll come over to Instagram at Resilient Retail Club after the episode and let me know what you took away. Charlotte, thank you so much for squeezing me into what I'm sure is a very busy schedule right now. Do you want to start us off by just telling us a little bit about you?
Gosh, yes, this is always the hardest question. I'm Charlotte Morley, and I'm the founder of The Little Loop. We describe ourselves as the first shared wardrobe for kids in the UK, which in practice means it's a rental service for children's clothing where people can take what they need and then put them back and then take it again and keep swapping and swapping and swapping. So I built the business. I launched it about 2 years ago, and it's been a steady process to get it to the point that it's at now. But before that, I did so many different things. I worked for the Ministry of Defence for 10 years. I was a teacher for a few years, geography, environmentalism's always been my thing. And I then worked in tech, in retail tech, but not on the high street was my job before this. So I was the head of digital product and not on the high street. So that's me. I've done as I say, a range of different things, but this is very much kind of where I think I've always really wanted to be. And it's definitely my happy place.
And it sounds like a culmination of lots of different elements of what you've done before.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think what it's kind of bringing together quite a lot of threads, like my project management skills, my retail knowledge, my tech knowledge, my environmentalism. This is actually the best way I could find to get all those together in one place.
Amazing. And of course, just to say, if anybody didn't catch this before, then one of the reasons that your story caught my eye was, of course, you're recently on Dragon's Den.
I was, yep.
Although actually, how long ago was that? Because I'm never quite sure what the cycle is between them filming it and them actually showing it.
Yeah, and actually it's amazing because you don't really think about it yourself, but it was 6 months ago. It was 7 months ago. It was July the 1st we recorded it. So there's quite a big gap between recording it and it airing. But yes, I was on Dragon's Den, and it's interesting because it's not something I would have ever dreamed of doing. Yes. I certainly hadn't planned to. But some of their researchers approached me and asked me to apply. And actually the opportunity just seemed too big to miss because, as you know, the business is a rental business. Trying to get rental into the mainstream and to get more people to know about it seemed it's so critical and it's not easy. And I think for me to be able to go and do that on national television with a 4 million person audience it was such a great opportunity to try and get more people to understand the circular economy and rental.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's what really interested me about the stories, because I'm fascinated by all these new models of retail. I mean, this is my 22nd year in the retail industry, and
Wow.
It's fascinating to see how it's changed and how these new models have come up. And I've written for Forbes several times about Resale, for example. On the podcast a couple of weeks ago, we had Recurate, which is a platform which helps any brand add resale to their platform. And I really see it as, from what I'm seeing from kind of retail trends and industry trends, I really see it as this big movement towards more sustainable methods. So let's talk a little bit more about the rental market then. It's specific. So how big do you think it's going to get?
It's a really hard question. It's been so niche, and I think it hasn't taken off fully yet. But it's in the last year there's been a real marked shift in consumer attitudes towards it, and I think we're seeing very much on the high end occasion wear end of things. It's now becoming very much. It's just very accepted. It's kind of de rigueur. So I think in certain verticals, it's already getting there. I think in terms of renting for every day, which is what we're doing, and which is what's very, which is really quite unique about what we're doing. We're allowing people to rent quite low price items to be worn every day.
Yeah.
I think it has the potential to be huge. We're certainly building a system which could genuinely replace fast fashion, which genuinely could give you all of the clothes that you need at a price that's comparable with fast fashion, but you're getting ethical, sustainable clothes sustainably without the waste. And I think the more consumers move in that direction mentally, consumers are already thinking, a lot of consumers are already thinking that way.
Yeah.
It is the obvious solution. It does make a lot of sense. So I think it has enormous potential. It will always fight fast fashion. Changing people's behavior is hard. Changing the way people think about things is tough. But things like, Dragon's Den giving us that airtime, people like yourself giving us a voice, it's all moving in the right direction. So I think it's got huge potential, but it's going to take quite a lot of people together to drive the movement to make sure that it gets there. And it's not easy. From a business perspective, it's much harder to run the logistics of a rental business than it is resale or conventional e-commerce. So it's going to take a lot of people who've kind of got the wherewithal to do that and to get that kind of moving in that direction.
And we were just talking before we started recording about almost like that process of how you track everything from start to finish. So you've got that element, and then also you've got that element where I was looking at your website, and you were talking about how you actually take everything back, and then so when it's sent out, it's all ready to go again. So, of course, that adds in all of these extra layers of complexity to the model. But do you think with scale, it will become surmountable and easier?
Definitely. I think, at scale, when you can have, lots of skilled operatives and you've got the space and you've got the facilities to do it, we've just upgraded our facility and it's already a lot easier. And I think as you get bigger and bigger and bigger, it feels like as it gets bigger, it shouldn't get easier, but I think it genuinely will, because then you can afford a lot of the machinery and things like that, which makes all of those processes a lot easier. And I think the thing is, it is the secret sauce of rental. Rent the Runway used to describe itself as the biggest dry cleaners in America. And I think it's the nuts and bolts of a rental business. And, rental businesses can outsource that to other third parties. But for me, being able to see the clothes, being able to quality control them ourselves, and more importantly, being able to make, my concern about using a 3PL has always been, are they going to bother getting the stains out, or are they just going to say, no, that's not worth it? Whereas for us, being able to keep those garments in circulation is at the heart of what we do. Yeah. We need to keep the clothes in circulation. That's how we reduce the environmental impact of the fashion industry. So perfecting our operations so that they are designed specifically for children's wear to make sure we can get those stains out, keep those clothes, which are otherwise in amazing condition, in circulation is so critical. And I don't want to trust that to somebody else. So I think if a rental business can crack that, and it's not easy to crack, but once you've cracked it, I think then you can be brilliant.
So it's kind of about deciding how much control that you're going to keep then in the business itself when it comes to kind of, you say quality control must be critical. So people are receiving, it's not the same experience as perhaps getting hand-me-downs from a friend, you're getting something that's pristine and you've selected it. And so it does feel different for the kind of, I don't even know how you describe it, the sort of casual economy of people recirculating kids' clothes that sort of happens.
It's about that intrinsic value. And I think this is something that I really strongly believe in. People say, what's a competitor to you? Our biggest competitor is hand-me-downs, and that's great. Hand-me-downs are amazing, and I would never, ever want to undermine that. I don't want to undermine community, sharing, the fact that you can meet up your neighbours or your friends and swap clothes. That is brilliant. That the flaw in hand-me-downs and even charity shops is kind of the emotional value. So I think what you see is that people go, oh, well, it's just a hand-me-down. So not everybody, please, I mean, I'm not going to tar everyone with the same brush, but I think, and I've done it, you go, oh, well, that's a hand-me-down. We'll use those for nursery clothes. Oh, I got that from the charity shop. It didn't cost me very much. Oh, if they put paint all over it, it's okay. And I think we do need to get to a place where people really value the things that they own. And so what we're trying to do is build a layer of value in there by allowing you to choose it, allowing it to arrive wrapped in tissue paper so it feels like you've bought something new. It has that slightly different emotional kind of connection that, oh, well, it's something that I need to look after. And that's not to say, we want people to, we're not going to penalize people who don't, who do stain the clothes. This is children's wear. We're very aware of the fact that kids stain things. It's not like you must keep your child in, wrapped in tissue paper. That's not what I mean. But I do think as a society, moving to a place where we value our things is where we've got to get to. We've got to move away from that idea that, oh, well, something's cheap or something's, easy to get, therefore I don't need to treat it well. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits of rental is getting people to just think a little bit differently and just take a little bit of extra care over things. And I think that's the risk of hand-me-downs, is that people go, oh, well, it's just a hand-me-down.
So they're kind of custodians.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's interesting. And actually, I was just thinking, sort of slightly off on a tangent, but I was thinking about what you were talking about, how you reprocessing everything, which makes it complicated. However, I will say, I used to work for Coast before it became part of Boohoo. One of the things they had to do when they got an e-commerce return, because sometimes you're talking about £200, £300 dresses, they would have to steam it. So it would have to go through the steam tunnel, rebagged, everything else. And they actually weren't even getting any money for that because...
absolutely. It's not a dissimilar process. But I think because we are getting, obviously the pricing, we don't make a huge margin on it, but
no.
We will go that extra mile. So, we're not going to go, oh, it's got a mark on it, it's not worth us bothering, we're just going to bin that. We value every single item we've got. But you're right, it's not that dissimilar to a normal returns process. But again, because of the way it works, people don't need to order 15 different sizes from us and then send 14 of them back. I hyperbolize, but you order what you need, the size that fits, and if it doesn't, you send it back and swap it, and we just put it back into circulation, so you don't have any of the risk of that waste. And we've tried to build a system which is very, very easy to swap, so no one does end up having to kind of buy extra sizes because they're buying online, they don't know what's going to fit. They go for the thing they think's the best, and then we'll just swap it straight away for you if it doesn't fit.
Fantastic. So we talked a little bit about this, but what do you think is fueling the growth in this market? Do you think it's predominantly based on the growing understanding of the impact of fast fashion, for example?
I think that's where it started. Yeah, I think there's definitely this drive for sustainable consumption and sustainable fashion in particular. There's a lot of messaging out there about that consumers are increasingly becoming aware of. And I think during coronavirus as well, I think there was a shift. I think people became a lot more aware of what they were doing. I'm not sure quite what drove it during coronavirus, but there was a big shift. 60% of consumers now say that they do consider sustainability when they're thinking about what they buy. So I think that's very much the driver. I think what will become a driver more and more is when people get used to it, the convenience of it, the fun of it. Certainly for us, sustainability will never go away. We will always maintain that as our North Star, and making sure that we make sure our services are always sustainable. And we don't want to drive more consumption. But with that as the foundation, then you can have fun. You can say, oh, this is great. I get to go on a website and pick 10 things for my children. And, and it's an enjoyable experience. So I think that will come into it, but also convenience. I think renting has the potential to be much more convenient than shopping. It's a system which is just designed to be seamless, this idea of just swapping, always having what you need. So I think it starts with sustainability, but I think the other elements to it will increasingly become more important.
And even storage space, as you said, that's one of those things. When I think about my children are older now, they're 11 and 14, but when I think about them being younger, I think about those big bin bags of clothes and this idea where you've got far fewer, but you're kind of circulating them, and then and also I suppose the benefit of you being able to pick brands, because it's interesting, the brands that you've gone for as well, pick the brands that are really desirable. And so actually it's not just that it's fast fashion prices effectively, but the brands that you're actually getting your hands on are just, well, they're more ethical, sustainable, but they're also, they're just really lovely, basically. People think about people like Frugi, for example. And, back in 2012, funnily enough, I worked for an organic baby company, which is sadly no more, but there's something really inherently lovely about those really high quality, ethical kids' clothes as well.
And it's funny because actually I started off very much about the waste and very focused on sustainability and reducing waste and keeping things in circulation. As soon as I started to work with the brands that I work with, so Frugi is a great example, Little Green Radicals, Kite, all of the brands that I work with, what I suddenly realized was it wasn't just about the eco side, it was about the people and the ethics and the fact that I know that those brands are paying their workers as best they can manage in their supply chain. We know supply chains are incredibly difficult to manage.
Yeah.
But, I know that they go to their factories, they look at the people that are working there in the eye and they pay them a fair wage and they're paying for organic cotton. And actually that to me almost became a bigger imperative for me. It's like, actually, we are allowing people to access these ethically produced clothes and we're rewarding the brands who go that extra mile and make those clothes ethically and better quality. So yeah, I think that's really important. I think people are, again, increasingly becoming aware of the human side of it. And the Black Lives Matter movement opened up that whole wider conversation about exploitation of people worldwide. And the sense that people are, we don't even notice that the boohoos of this world are doing what they're doing, but unfortunately they are. And I think now we are much more aware of that. So that's really important. But yeah, as you say, the space element, I actually set this up. It was sustainability driven. That's always been a big driver for me. But the other thing for me was I genuinely hated that process of clearing out my kids' clothes. I genuinely felt sick. I know it kind of sounds a bit, but it's true. I hated doing it. And we have a house, but it's not massive. We don't have a huge amount of storage space. Where do you keep them between children? Where do you keep them after the first child when you've not got time to take, and so on and so forth. And I think that idea that you want to buy more expensive ethical clothes, not like designer clothes, but just slightly more expensive ethical clothes, they are worth it. But if you don't have the time to then sell them on when you're finished, because a lot of us who are working don't have time to be trawling Facebook. And then it's that sense that, God, I've spent, 30 quid on a dress for my child and I'm not going to get that back.
Yeah.
Whereas renting it, it's going to cost you about £10 if you keep it kind of for 3 months, which is what people do tend to do.
Yeah. So going back to what happened on Dragon's Den, so it was interesting when I was watching it, Peter Jones said that, and I know you've mentioned that he was perhaps more positive than it was the final edit, but one of the things that he was saying was that he doesn't see the demand for these more sustainable products when fast fashion can sell at such a low price. Do you think that was something that maybe is slightly not the most current way of looking at things? Let's put it that way.
I mean, I think if you literally take a snapshot of right now, he's absolutely right. Fast fashion is still king. It's so easy to go to Primark and get cheap things. And I've been reading like the Facebook comments on our Dragon's Den performance. And so the comments were saying, why would I pay £18 a month? I could go to Primark and get a whole set of clothes for that. But then there were really interesting, there were other people going on there saying, you're missing the point. This is about sustainability. This is about ethics. We need to stop doing that. And that I don't think we'd have heard just 2 years ago. So this is people, nothing to do with me, who were going on making that point on these comments. And for me, it was a real oh, wow, this is amazing. And I think, so if you take a snapshot of right now, yes, fast fashion is still king, but people are becoming more and more and more aware of it. And the bottom line is, and I said this on Dragon's Den, and I said, this might sound naive, but the planet literally can't do it. We don't have the resources to keep doing it. So if fast fashion's allowed to carry on doing what it does, at some point there's going to be a massive implosion. Yeah. But actually, I know, because I sit on Textiles 2030, which is the kind of latest RAP policy group to try to think about how we can legislate to reduce the impact of fast fashion. The government is thinking this way. There is a lot of movement at all kind of tiers of society to try to end this. Yeah. So I think, it won't happen overnight, but I do think we're going to get to a point where consumers are going to change the way they want to shop. There are going to be more options to make it easy for them to shop differently. And legislation is going to mean that these fast fashion places are going to have to, if nothing else, at least put their prices up, because they're going to have to start paying their workers fairly. They're going to have to start paying tariffs on their waste. And once that all starts to happen and the prices start to go up, then services like mine become increasingly attractive. And I think that's where we've got to get to. And I do think in the next few years that will happen.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what's interesting now is that we're hearing, as I said, I was back in 2012, I worked for an organic company called Green Baby. And then it was all the question was around why ethical kids clothes so expensive. And I think now what I'm hearing more is almost like, why is fast fashion so cheap? You know, it's like, where are the numbers in here? Like if you're selling a t-shirt for £5, you know, it's like I think there is a growing realization that almost like nothing comes without a cost. So
it's about making it that transparent for people, because you don't think, right, we're all unthinking. And I think particularly when you've got kids, you're busy, you're stressed, you've got a million different things to do. And you're like, I need a t-shirt, I'm going to walk into H&M, great, it's there, I've bought it, boom.
Yeah.
And I think what's happening is the conversation is actually making you think, hang on, if that costs £5, it's been grown. The cotton's been grown, the cotton's been turned into fabric, the fabric's been dyed, the fabric's been cut, the fabric's been sewn. There's the design process that's gone on before that. It's then been shipped from the other side of the world. How is that possible for £5? Well, the reality is it's not. Somebody is losing out, and it's not the fast fashion houses that are losing out, it's their workers. And I think a lot of people are becoming increasingly uncomfortable with playing a part in that. I certainly am, but I wasn't 5 years ago because I hadn't thought about it. Not that I wasn't someone who didn't care, but I just didn't really know. And I think that's it. As people start to understand it, they don't want to be a part of that anymore.
Yeah, for sure. So Stephen Bartlett mentioned that he'd been hearing conversations about retailers looking to build resale into their own models. And a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, we had a company called Recurate, for example, who have a tech platform that allow retailers to do that. Do you think that rental and resale will both kind of grow together? Do you think that resales maybe a little bit more mainstream than rental at the moment? Where do you sort of see these kind of alternative models going?
I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head, really. Yes, resale is more mainstream right now because it's just an extension of shopping. Okay, so it's still ownership. So I think people are much more comfortable with it right now. It's just, oh, well, I own it. Then you don't need to think about it. It's the where I see it being is I personally see them being completely complementary. There are certain things that it does not make sense to rent. I would not rent a pair of jeans. Certainly not, unless they were like super high fashion, you know, they've got X design on it and a year later they're going to be out of fashion. I'll never wear them again.
Or they were maternity.
Or maternity jeans, yes. Or children's jeans because they're going to grow out of them.
Yeah.
But for me personally, I buy a pair of jeans and I wear them to death, 5 to 10 years of wear. And I'm not unstylish. Maybe I'm not massively high fashion. So there are things that it doesn't make sense to rent. And therefore, there's always going to be the need for a secondary market for those things, because after this 10 years, they might not be dead. But there are some things that it makes complete sense to rent. And even within children's wear, I mean, obviously rental, I think makes a huge amount of sense for children's wear because they're growing. Yeah. But honestly, I buy my children's nursery clothes from the charity shop or their hand-me-downs because I feel, and I am the owner of my rental company, and I'm happy to say this, I feel more comfortable sending them to nursery in secondhand cclothes that are maybe already stained. Yeah. And we use rental clothes all of the rest of the time. So I rent their clothes for weekends, evenings, holidays, everything else. So I would say 50% of their wardrobe for me is rented and 50% is secondhand. And I own a rental company. Personally, I think that's the optimal situation. And I think as adults, for children, I think that's what we should all be doing. I think resale sits perfectly well alongside rental. At the moment, there's a bit of tension and a bit of competition between the two, but I think there's space for both. And I think it makes so much sense to rent the things that it makes sense to rent for, and then to buy other things, but buy them secondhand if you can, or buy them from incredibly good quality, high-end, sustainable, ethical companies if you're going to hold on to them for a long time. And then they keep their value as well. So then when you resell them, they stay in circulation. But don't just stop buying cheap crap fast fashion, which ultimately is going to fall apart and it's not going to have a secondary life. Mm-hmm. For me, this is quite a long answer, but it's quite important. Yeah. I think resale shouldn't be seen as the answer to fast fashion. Right. I think we should never get to a point where we're like, well, I bought it cheap from X fast fashion house. I won't mention any names, but it's okay because I'll be able to put it on Depop and it'll sell, because it's only going to sell once and it's going to fall apart and it's going to end up in landfill. So I think resale is the answer to buying amazing ethical things and being able to keep those in circulation and making sure you're buying high quality. And it might feel expensive to put that money out there up front, but because you can resell it, obviously the price is much lower. But I do worry that resale becomes the answer to buying tat that we don't need to have. And I think it's better to resell it than to throw it away. But if you're buying it thinking it's okay because I can resell it, I don't think that's the answer, because it just doesn't last long enough and people have been exploited in its production.
Right. No, for sure. So I'd love to talk about things just a little bit from a brand's perspective. So, for example, I know that a lot of people listening have got their own brands, and I know that several people listening have their own ethical kidswear brands, for example. So in terms of what is it like if you're a business owner and you join the Little Loop? You obviously built up a partnership with some of your brands, but kind of how does it work from their perspective?
So we are incredibly unique in the subscription rental space, not so much now in the occasion where one-off rental space, but certainly in the subscription rental space, we partner fully with our brands. Mm-hmm. So we don't wholesale stock, because for me, the heart of rental is about understanding garments, learning how well they last, being able to feed that data back to our suppliers so that they can feed that back into their production and they can increasingly produce the things that last better and start to phase out those designs that fall apart or the colors that fall apart, or, kids look cute and white, but my God, it's not, it's not responsible really to produce white clothes for children. Maybe baby grows, because obviously you can boil them and bloody, but 4-year-olds are going to trash them with chocolate ice cream within weeks. Yeah. So it's things like, it's that kind of data that we can feed back. So I never wanted to wholesale stock and divorce rental from fashion. For me, it's about helping brands to see the benefits of a circular model so they can increasingly design for circularity and move more towards selling for circularity. The dream would be eventually to get to a place where seasonality becomes less of a thing, where sales become less of a thing, mm-hmm. because actually clothes maintain their value season on season on season. So I think working with brands and helping them to get to that place has always been a really important part of what we do. So how it actually works is we have an agreement with brands whereby we share revenue with them. Every time an item rents, we track every day that it rents. Right. And we track how much it's earned from the days that it's rented, and we share our revenue with the retailers. And a garment should last long enough that the retailer will earn more than a wholesale eventually for it. Right. So where we would have bought it from you for 50%, you'll earn more than that by renting it out, albeit over a longer time frame. So there's that adjustment. And you could rent, you can earn significantly more. It's not like, gazillions more, because this is children's wear and margins are small. And then at the end of its life, we resell it and you take a share of that resale as well. So, but we partner really closely with our brands. We have a data system, which is getting better as well. We're building on it all the time. So at the moment, we can download all of the data on the garments so you can see how long they've lasted, which ones haven't lasted as long. And we'll get to the point where we can have dashboards and things that show you, trends in that. So all of your yellow T-shirts, for example, yellow, not a good color. It goes green really quickly. Yeah. All of your yellow T-shirts only lasted X number of months, whereas all of your X T-shirts in X fabric lasted for 2 years. Right. So it's all of that kind of thing that we can share with brands, as well as sharing revenue with them.
Oh, fantastic. And presumably also, from a purely commercial standpoint, you're also introducing that brand to somebody who is definitely an interested consumer of ethical children's fashion.
Absolutely. And I think, we've, again, from the beginning, one of our things has been to work with brands who maybe don't have that platform, or it's about amplifying the voice of ethical children's wear and ethical clothing, full stop. So we see it as a community of brands and us, and we're trying to we each amplify each other's message. So our brands are amazing. They share about, they tell people about us. We tell people about them. Maybe someone's a Frugi fan. They come to our site to rent Frugi. They discover Pigeon Organics, and vice versa. Yeah. So that's how all marketplaces work. Yeah, for sure. But because it's rental, it's giving it that added kind of level of, wow, these brands are awesome because they're actually doing something really different. And they are. Our brands have been incredible. They've taken a leap of faith with us. It hasn't been smooth the whole way, and they've just been brilliant. And that's been fantastic working with those brands. But it's a challenge to balance the supply and demand. That marketplaces, it's always hard. Yeah. So at the moment, we're probably at about our optimal level of brands. I think we would look to bring on more in not too distant future. Yeah. Right now, we've got about the right balance. We probably want to diversify our mix a little bit, because a lot of ethical children's wear brands are quite similar in terms of their style and design. So the next thing for us will be to diversify a little bit in terms of style so we can appeal to a wider range of customers. But yeah, we've been really lucky with our brands. They're fabulous.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. I'd just love to briefly wrap up by just saying, how was it being on Dragon's Den? I feel like a lot of people listening are probably in the back of their heads wondering, what was the experience like? And you said that obviously they'd approached you, which is amazing, but how long did it take? Long does it take to prepare?
It was like 3 months. So I think they approached me in April and said, will you apply? So they don't give you a spot. They don't say you're a mate. It's like, will you apply for this show? And then you go through the same application process of everybody else. And that application process is grueling. You've got to submit business plans and data, and you've got to show that you know where you're going and all of that. So they do some really significant due diligence. And then, like, in terms of personally preparing, like, I had an amazing intern at the time who we would rehearse in my back garden, and it was terrifying, absolutely terrifying. I've never done anything like that before. I'm not quite sure how I held it together, but once I walked through the lift doors, it all just went. It was like, I knew my numbers, and they were absolutely lovely. Like, they don't edit it this way always, but every single one of them was fair, kind, encouraging. And even Peter Jones, he did offer me a job. Actually, they did cut that out of the edit. I was like, no, why have you not put out the edit? But they were all really fair. And every question, like, what Peter Jones' question about fast fashion, bang on the money. That is going to be the biggest concern of any investor or of any, and although it's not archaic yet, but it will be in 5 years' time. But I think, I actually really enjoyed it, and they all raised some really interesting points, which gave me food for thought.
Yes.
So I actually loved it. I was terrified. I wouldn't have gone on it. If you'd asked me like a year ago, would you go on Dragon's Den? I'd be like, not on your belly. But, I'm so obviously glad I did. And I feel lucky that it went well. I do think they were kind to me, but equally, I think if you're prepared,
and you knew your numbers. It's funny because one of my big things is talking about the importance of knowing your numbers. And funnily enough, it's one of those things that people say to me. I quite often will have people say, like, I had this feeling like, what if I went on Dragon's Den and I didn't know what to tell the dragons? And it's just really funny. It's like one of those kind of real moments that people get about the numbers.
Yeah, but it's quite artificial. Like, ask me my numbers now, and I'd have to go and look at them again because they don't sit in the front of your head every day because you're not using them all the time. And actually standing there in front of five people with those numbers in your head, like normally you'd have crib notes or whatever. Like, so it is quite artificial, but very good for you.
I'm sure. And what goes through your head where you sort of have to like turn away and do your thinking about what you're going to go with? Like, I mean, that must be
that was crazy. It was a really high pressure moment because you don't feel like you can stand there forever. And I mean, believe it or not, I had convinced myself I wouldn't get investment, or that maybe I'd get one dragon.
Yeah.
So I actually hadn't prepared. It was the one thing I hadn't prepared for. All I knew is that I did want to come away with, if someone offered me, I really did want to come away with it because I think it's quite important that if you can. But I hadn't prepared for that moment. So it was really like on like fly by the seat of your pants kind of moment. And I was like, I suddenly went, oh my God, because it had all been going quite well and it was quite easy. And then suddenly it was like, oh, right, I really need to make a decision here.
Wow.
So that was probably the scariest part once I was actually in there.
But what amazing dragons you got. I mean, they're all amazing.
And they're wonderful people. I met Stephen yesterday. I met Deborah last week. They're so kind. They're really helpful, thoughtful, and they do actually want to help. So, I feel incredibly lucky to have got them on board. As I say, that they genuinely are involved in the business, or they are now. It's taken really until now to get all the investment, everything tied up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I genuinely feel lucky to have them on board.
Wow, what a fantastic episode. I really enjoyed my conversation with Charlotte, and I hope that you did too. Do come over to Instagram at Resilient Retail Club. Why not let me know where you were when you were listening? I always love to see those pictures, as well as let me know what you took away from today's episode. Would you consider putting an element of rental into your business? If you have a moment, I know I ask this every week, but it absolutely makes such a difference to rate and review the podcast. So Spotify have recently introduced ratings. If you would be kind enough to rate that on the podcast page, that would be amazing. Or you can do the same on iTunes, and on iTunes you can even leave a review, and I absolutely love to read them. I read them all personally and I love them. So thank you so much to everyone who's taken the time to do that. And of course, if you follow or subscribe to the podcast, then you'll be the first to know about each new episode every week. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, then I invite you to check out resilientretailclub.com. The Resilient Retail Club is the membership for anyone wanting to start, grow or scale a profitable product business. No more trawling Google trying to find the answers to your questions or wading through general business advice that speaks mainly to service-based businesses. Whether you're still at the idea stage or you've been going for a while but want to get more focused and organised when it comes to your business, the Resilient Retail Club is the place for you. With a library of courses tailored to creative product businesses, several live sessions a month, and a supportive and active community, the Resilient Retail Club is the perfect membership to help you hit your goals faster. Check it out at resilientretailclub.com.